Imagine standing at the edge of a world that is dying. Forests disappear, giants vanish, entire species fade into silence. Yet somehow, a handful of extraordinary survivors endure against impossible odds. Their descendants are still alive today, carrying the story of Earth's greatest struggle across millions of years. How did they outlive countless creatures that seemed far stronger? Today we're uncovering the incredible journey of the ancient survivors who walked out of a dying world. Before we begin, please like this video, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. It truly helps us bring more fascinating stories from humanity's forgotten past. Now let's travel back to a world on the brink of extinction. The wind never stops moving across the empty plain. It sweeps over frozen ground, rattles dry grass that survives in scattered patches, and disappears into a horizon where towering walls of ice seem to merge with a pale sky. Nothing about this landscape suggests permanence. Rivers refuse to stay where they once flowed. Seasons no longer follow familiar rhythms. Animals appear in astonishing numbers one year, then vanish almost without warning the next. Even the stars steady above witness a world quietly changing beneath them. For the people living here, there is no word for an ice age. There is only home. Home happens to be dying. Long before kingdoms, monuments, or written memory, small bands of modern humans spread across a planet unlike the one we know today. Vast ice sheets cover much of the northern hemisphere. Sea levels stand more than 100 meters lower than today, exposing enormous stretches of land that future generations will never see. Britain remains connected to mainland Europe. Southeast Asia forms a broad continent known today as Sundaland. Between Siberia and Alaska stretches a cold but passable landscape called Beringia, linking two continents that will later be separated by ocean. To those who walk across them, none of these places seem unusual. They simply exist as solid and dependable as mountains appear to be. Yet beneath this appearance of stability lies a world approaching one of the greatest transformations in human history. Before we go deeper, take a moment to like the video and subscribe if this is the kind of history and mystery you enjoy. The ancient survivors moving across these lands cannot possibly know that they stand at the threshold between two different Earths. Their children will inherit rivers flowing in unfamiliar directions. Their grandchildren may never again see valleys where they once hunted. Entire coastlines will disappear beneath rising seas. Forests will replace grasslands. Deserts will bloom before drying once more. Places remembered by countless generations will simply cease to exist. Unlike many stories of vanished civilizations, this is not the tale of stone cities collapsing or forgotten kings losing empires. This is something both quieter and larger. It is the story of ordinary people facing extraordinary change over hundreds of years. They possess no maps of the future. No warning arrives. There is no single catastrophic day when everything ends. Instead, the world slowly withdraws beneath their feet. Modern archaeology allows fragments of their lives to emerge from remarkable places. Beneath layers of sediment, buried campsites preserve discarded stone blades, shaped with astonishing precision. Animal bones bear careful cut marks left by skilled hands. Charcoal marks forgotten hearths, where families once gathered against relentless cold. Tiny beads carved from shells or animal teeth suggest that beauty memory and identity matter even during the harshest times. What survives in the records suggests people who are far more adaptable than older stereotypes once imagined. They are not primitive wanderers drifting without purpose. They understand migration routes followed by mammoths, horses, reindeer, and bison. They recognize edible plants hidden beneath snow or emerging briefly during warmer months. They read clouds, winds, and animal behavior with a sophistication developed across countless generations. Knowledge becomes their greatest shelter, Every successful hunt depends upon remembering landscapes that stretch beyond the horizon. Every winter camp reflects decisions made by ancestors who learned through painful experience where storms gather, where rivers freeze safely, and where predators most often travel. Nothing is written down, yet entire libraries exist within memory. This invisible inheritance proves more valuable than any physical possession. Still, the environment refuses to remain predictable forever. Around 20,000 years ago, the last glacial maximum reaches its greatest extent. Immense ice sheets dominate northern Europe and North America. Temperatures remain significantly colder than today across much of the globe. Rainfall patterns differ dramatically. Powerful winds carry fine dust across continents, creating landscapes unlike anything visible in the modern world. Then gradually, almost imperceptibly at first, change begins. The reasons remain the subject of extensive scientific study. Small variations in Earth's orbit alter how sunlight is distributed across the planet. Atmospheric greenhouse gas concentrations shift. Oceans respond slowly, redistributing enormous quantities of heat. Ice begins to melt. Each change influences another, creating feedbacks that reshape the global climate over thousands of years. No individual human notices the entire process. Instead, each generation observes only subtle differences. Winters perhaps become slightly shorter. Certain animals arrive earlier than expected. Rivers flood at unfamiliar times. Hunting grounds once reliable become increasingly uncertain. None of these changes seem world-ending on their own. Together, however, they signal the beginning of an entirely new age. The evidence remains incomplete, and scholars still debate exactly how different regional climates evolve from place to place. Some areas experience gradual warming. Others endure sudden reversals, becoming colder again before warming resumes. No single explanation fully accounts for every local pattern because Earth's climate system is extraordinarily complex. Yet the broader direction is unmistakable. The frozen world is retreating. As glaciers slowly withdraw, they leave behind raw landscapes untouched for tens of thousands of years. Fresh lakes form where immense blocks of ice once rested. Rivers carve new valleys through recently exposed ground. Plants advance northward. Shrubs appear where only sparse grasses once survived. Forests patiently follow. To modern observers, these shifts unfold across geological time. To the people living through them, they occur within family memory. An elder recalls hunting reindeer across open plains where dense woodland now stands. Parents remember crossing frozen rivers that no longer freeze reliably. Children grow up accepting entirely different landscapes as normal, unaware that their grandparents inhabited another world altogether. Memory becomes unstable because the land itself refuses to preserve it. The disappearance of familiar places creates challenges extending beyond survival. Landscapes are more than collections of hills and rivers. They hold stories. They anchor traditions. They define seasonal movement and shared identity. When a valley floods or a coastline sinks beneath rising water, practical knowledge disappears alongside emotional connection. Generations must constantly choose between preserving old ways and inventing new ones. Some adapt with remarkable flexibility. Others almost certainly do not. Archaeology rarely records failure with the same clarity that it records survival. Entire communities may vanish, leaving little trace beyond abandoned camps gradually reclaimed by soil and vegetation. Organic materials decay. Wooden tools disappear. Voices fade without leaving echoes. History often remembers only those fortunate enough to endure. That quiet imbalance shapes everything we know about humanity's distant past. The people whose descendants eventually spread across every continent are not necessarily stronger, wiser, or more deserving than those who vanished. They are survivors of countless circumstances beyond individual control. changing climate, shifting ecosystems, successful cooperation, fortunate geography, and sometimes simple chance. The world they inherit is no longer the world into which they were born. Without realizing it, they are becoming the ancient survivors who walk out of a dying world and into the beginning of our own. The old world does not disappear all at once. It lingers in scattered places, clinging to frozen valleys, wind-swept grasslands and coastlines that seem unchanged from the lives of distant ancestors. A hunting trail remains familiar for decades before a marsh slowly swallows it. A river continues to feed migrating animals until melting glaciers redirect its course. Entire generations grow up believing their homeland will remain exactly as it has always been, only to watch it transform before their children reach adulthood. This slow unravelling forces human communities to become remarkable observers of the natural world. Every morning begins with careful attention. The direction of the wind matters. Fresh snow reveals which animals pass during the night. Clouds gathering above distant hills may determine whether a hunting expedition succeeds or whether precious energy is wasted. Survival depends less upon strength than upon reading countless subtle signals hidden throughout the landscape. The people occupying these late Ice Age frontiers live in relatively small groups, often numbering only a few dozen individuals. Such communities are large enough to share knowledge and care for one another, yet small enough to move efficiently whenever conditions demand. Mobility is not a sign of instability. It is one of their greatest advantages. Unlike later agricultural societies tied to fields and permanent settlements, these families carry only what they truly need. Their homes are temporary but carefully planned. In open grassland, shelters may be constructed from wooden poles covered with animal hides. In regions where timber is scarce, mammoth bones occasionally provide structural support, creating surprisingly durable dwellings capable of enduring harsh winters. Archaeological discoveries across Eastern Europe reveal circular structures built from hundreds of mammoth bones, surrounded by hearth storage pits and the remains of repeated occupation. These sites suggest communities that return season after season, following rhythms established over generations. Their relationship with animals extends far beyond hunting. Reindeer migrations become moving calendars marking the changing seasons with extraordinary precision. Herds of wild horses reshape entire landscapes as they graze across broad plains. Woolly mammoths create natural pathways through vegetation, opening routes later followed by humans. Wolves patrol similar territories, sometimes competing with people for prey, sometimes unknowingly helping hunters locate weakened animals. Each species occupies a place within an intricate ecological web. Human beings survive not by dominating that system, but by understanding it. Stone tools reveal just how sophisticated that understanding becomes. Far from producing crude implements, Ice Age craftspeople manufacture blades of remarkable efficiency. Carefully prepared cores allow multiple razor-sharp flakes to be removed with astonishing consistency. Antler and bone become needles, spear points, fishhooks, and specialized equipment adapted for different environments. Adhesives made from birch tar or natural resins help bind stone points securely to wooden shafts. These technologies require planning, experimentation, and detailed knowledge passed through many generations. What survives in the archaeological record represents only a fraction of their ingenuity. Most clothing disappears because leather fur-woven fibers and plant materials decay over thousands of years. Yet finely crafted bone needles found across Eurasia strongly suggest tailored garments designed specifically for surviving severe climates. Loose animal skins alone would not provide the flexibility needed for long journeys through snow and ice. Carefully fitted clothing layered for insulation likely allows these communities to occupy environments that earlier human populations could never endure. Fire remains equally essential, though its importance reaches beyond warmth. A controlled hearth transforms frozen meat into digestible food, hardens wooden spear shafts, softens hides during preparation, and creates a gathering place where experience can be shared. Around these fires, younger members learn migration routes, dangerous river crossings, edible plants, seasonal weather patterns, and the habits of countless animal species. No books exist yet. Education continues every evening beneath smoke rising into dark skies. Language itself becomes one of humanity's greatest survival tools. Although no direct evidence preserves the spoken words of these ancient communities, nearly every aspect of their success points towards sophisticated communication. Coordinated hunts require careful planning. Long-distance exchange networks depend upon trust and negotiation. Complex tool-making demands detailed instruction. Stories preserve practical knowledge in forms that memory can retain across generations. The true wealth of these societies cannot be measured in possessions. It exists within relationships. A solitary individual rarely survives for long in such demanding environments. Injury, illness, or simple exhaustion can quickly become fatal without support from others. Archaeologists occasionally uncover skeletons showing severe disabilities or healed fractures that would have required months, even years of assistance from companions. These discoveries quietly challenge outdated assumptions about prehistoric life as relentlessly brutal and individualistic. Instead, compassion appears to possess deep evolutionary roots. Communities invest time and scarce resources in people who cannot immediately contribute to hunting or gathering. Elders preserve invaluable environmental knowledge. Skilled craftspeople manufacture tools even if age limits their mobility. Individuals recovering from injury remain part of the group rather than being abandoned. Cooperation repeatedly proves more successful than competition. Meanwhile, the landscape continues its gradual transformation. Grasslands begin shrinking in some regions as expanding forests claim open territory. The enormous grazing herds that once dominate Ice Age ecosystems gradually alter their migration patterns. Species adapted to cold, dry conditions face increasing pressure as temperatures rise and habitats fragment. For hunters whose lives revolve around following these animals, every ecological shift carries profound consequences. A valley that reliably supports mammoths for centuries may suddenly host dense woodland unsuitable for such enormous creatures. Reindeer routes drift northward. Rivers previously crossed during annual migrations become wider and more unpredictable as glacial melt intensifies. Familiar landmarks disappear beneath expanding lakes formed from retreating ice. No dramatic announcement marks these changes. Instead, they accumulate quietly year after year. Scholars still debate exactly how quickly different populations recognize the scale of what is happening. Some regions likely experience relatively stable conditions for long periods, while others undergo surprisingly rapid transitions. Climate records extracted from ice cores, lake sediments, pollen deposits, and ancient soils reveal that environmental change unfolds unevenly across the globe. Some communities adapt gradually. Others confront transformation within only a few generations. This uneven pace creates a patchwork world. One valley may flourish with abundant game, while another only a few hundred kilometers away grows increasingly barren. Such differences encourage movement, exploration, and sometimes competition between neighboring groups seeking reliable resources. Yet evidence also points toward extensive cooperation. Stone materials found hundreds of kilometers from their geological origins indicate long-distance exchange networks stretching across remarkable distances. A distinctive type of flint mined in one region may appear far away at another settlement. Marine shells decorate inland communities that have never seen the sea. Pigments such as red ochre travel across landscapes through complex social connections, whose full nature remains uncertain. These exchanges involve more than objects. Ideas move alongside them. New hunting techniques, innovative tool design, symbolic traditions, and practical environmental knowledge spread through encounters between communities. In a world undergoing relentless change, information becomes almost as valuable as food. Every successful adaptation increases the likelihood that another generation will survive. But beyond the horizon, the changes gathering across the Earth are becoming even larger. The glaciers continue their retreat. Coastlines prepare to drown beneath rising oceans. Entire continents are about to lose landscapes that modern humanity will never again walk upon. The survivors do not yet realize that some of the greatest journeys in human history are only beginning. The first sign is not the sea. It is the silence. For thousands of years, familiar sounds define the rhythm of life across the Great Ice Age plains. The distant rumble of migrating mammoths echoes across frozen valleys. Vast herds of reindeer move like flowing rivers over open grasslands. Wild horses stamp through windswept steppe, while bison darken entire horizons. Hunters know where these animals travel because their ancestors have followed the same seasonal movements for countless generations. Then those patterns begin to break. At first the changes seem temporary. A herd arrives several weeks later than expected. Another chooses an unfamiliar valley. Hunting camps that once guarantee food now produce little success. Families travel farther than ever before only to discover that landscapes remembered by their elders no longer behave as they once did. The Earth is entering one of the most dramatic climate transitions in recent geological history. Beginning roughly 15,000 years ago, the enormous ice sheets covering much of North America and northern Europe accelerate their retreat. Temperatures continue climbing, though not in a perfectly smooth progression. Some centuries warm rapidly before sudden reversals briefly restore colder conditions. Others experience gradual shifts almost too subtle for a single generation to notice. Yet viewed across millennia, the direction remains unmistakable. The frozen planet is giving way to a warmer one. This transformation reshapes every interconnected system on Earth. As glaciers melt, unimaginable quantities of fresh water pour into rivers and oceans. Great lakes appear where walls of ice once stand hundreds of meters thick. Meltwater carves entirely new drainage systems, redirecting rivers that had followed different paths for tens of thousands of years. Some valleys become fertile wetlands rich with birds and fish. Others disappear beneath expanding lakes that permanently erase familiar campsites. Every alteration forces people to adapt once again. For communities living near the margins of retreating glaciers, opportunity and danger arrive together. Freshly exposed ground supports new vegetation. Grazing animals soon follow, creating hunting possibilities in places that had previously been buried beneath the ice. Yet these same landscapes remain unstable. Huge blocks of melting ice collapse without warning. Temporary lakes held back by fragile ice dams occasionally burst, releasing catastrophic floods that race across entire regions. Geological evidence preserves scars left by these ancient outbursts, some among the largest floods known to science. No written account describes the terror of witnessing such an event, but the landscape still remembers. Elsewhere, forests begin advancing into territories once dominated by open tundra and grassland. At first, only scattered shrubs appear. Then small clusters of trees establish themselves along sheltered valleys. Century after century, the forests expand, transforming ecosystems that had remained remarkably stable throughout much of the Ice Age. For some species, this change proves beneficial. Red deer, elk, wild boar, and countless smaller woodland animals spread into newly favourable habitats. Birds occupy fresh nesting grounds. Diverse plant communities flourish beneath growing tree canopies. For others, the consequences are devastating. The great grazers that define Ice Age ecosystems depend upon enormous expanses of open vegetation. Mammoths thrive where grasses dominate the landscape. Woolly rhinoceroses require similar environments. As forests replace those vast plains, suitable habitat shrinks into isolated fragments. Climate alone does not explain their disappearance. Scholars continue debating the precise balance between environmental change and increasing human hunting pressure. Most evidence suggests neither factor acts independently. Instead, multiple forces combine over many centuries. Shrinking habitat weakens already vulnerable populations. Smaller herds become more susceptible to hunting. Reduced genetic diversity limits resilience. Gradually, species that once seem almost limitless fade from entire continents. The evidence remains incomplete, and no single explanation fully accounts for every extinction. Different regions likely follow different paths. Yet by the close of the Ice Age, many of the largest animals that had shared the world with humans for thousands of years are gone. The disappearance of these creatures transforms human life as profoundly as it transforms the environment itself. Communities built around predictable migrations must rethink everything they know. Traditional hunting grounds lose their value. Seasonal journeys inherited from ancestors become increasingly unreliable. Knowledge that once guarantees survival now requires constant revision. Adaptation becomes a continuous process rather than an occasional necessity. Remarkably, archaeological discoveries suggest that humans respond with extraordinary flexibility. Fishing grows more important in many regions as rivers and lakes multiply across the changing landscape. Sophisticated bone harpoons appear alongside finely crafted fishhooks and woven traps. Coastal communities harvest shellfish, seals, and seabirds with increasing efficiency. Inland groups diversify their diets, gathering a wider range of edible plants, nuts, berries, and smaller game than their Ice Age predecessors often relied upon. Rather than collapsing alongside the ecosystems around them, many human communities broaden their strategies. They refuse to depend upon any single source of survival. This flexibility may become one of the defining characteristics of Homo sapiens. Unlike many specialized Ice Age animals, humans possess an unusual ability to reinvent their relationship with the environment. Cultural knowledge spreads far more rapidly than biological evolution. A new hunting technique can be learned within weeks. Improved clothing can be copied within months. Innovative tools travel through exchange networks across hundreds of kilometers within a few generations. Ideas move faster than genes. That difference changes history. The archaeological record reveals subtle signs of increasingly complex social connections during this period. Decorative objects crafted from shells, ivory, amber, and carefully shaped stone appear across remarkably wide geographic areas. Similar artistic traditions emerge among communities separated by considerable distances. Red ochre continues to hold symbolic importance, used in burials and ritual activities, whose precise meanings remain uncertain. These shared practices suggest something profound. Even as familiar landscapes disappear, people maintain connections extending beyond their immediate families. Social networks become another form of adaptation. When one region suffers poor hunting conditions, neighboring groups may provide access to resources or information. Marriage between distant communities strengthens alliances and helps preserve genetic diversity within small populations. Knowledge gathered in one valley gradually spreads into another. Survival depends not only upon understanding nature, but also upon understanding one another. Meanwhile, another transformation unfolds almost unnoticed. Far from the ice sheets, coastlines begin retreating. Each year the ocean advances only a little farther inland. Beaches shift, estuaries widen. Salt water enters river mouths that had always been fresh. Low-lying plains slowly disappear beneath rising tides. No dramatic wave announces the loss. Entire generations simply watch the shoreline move. Children play where their grandparents once hunted. Their own grandchildren will paddle boats above those same forgotten camps, unaware that forests, rivers, and ancient pathways now lie beneath the sea. Today, marine archaeologists search these submerged landscapes using sonar sediment cores and underwater excavations. Hidden beneath modern coastlines are traces of the world these survivors once knew, a world largely erased not by violence, but by water rising centimetre after centimetre over thousands of years. The people living through these centuries cannot see the full scale of the transformation. From their perspective, they are solving one immediate problem after another. Find new hunting grounds, discover another river crossing, follow unfamiliar animal trails, learn which plants now grow where frozen earth once lay, protect children through another unpredictable winter. They never realize that with every adaptation they are becoming something new. Not merely survivors of a dying ice age, but pioneers of the modern world, a humanity learning step by careful step how to live on an earth that no longer resembles the one its ancestors first called home. As the land changes, the map of humanity changes with it. There is no council deciding where entire people should go. No leader stands before thousands with a grand plan for the future. Movement begins quietly, almost invisibly, as one family follows a herd farther than usual. Another abandons a valley after several poor seasons. A third hears from distant relatives that better hunting lies beyond the mountains. Generation after generation, these countless small decisions combine into one of the greatest migrations the world has ever witnessed. Looking backward through archaeology and genetics, it can seem as though humanity expands across the globe with remarkable confidence. Looking forward from the perspective of those making the journey, nothing feels certain. Every unfamiliar horizon carries both promise and danger. The distances involved are almost impossible to imagine. Without roads, maps, or written directions, people navigate using rivers, mountain ranges, coastlines, the movements of animals, and an intimate understanding of seasonal cycles. They rarely travel alone. Families move together, joined by children, elders, experienced hunters, skilled toolmakers, and individuals whose greatest contribution is knowledge accumulated across decades. Speed is never the goal. Survival is. Modern estimates suggest that human expansion often unfolds astonishingly slowly. A community may shift only a few kilometers within a lifetime, gradually exploring neighboring valleys before settling into new seasonal routines. Their grandchildren move a little farther. Their descendants continue the pattern. Over centuries, these small steps carry human populations across entire continents. Migration in many cases is less like an expedition than a tide. No one realizes how far they have come because every movement feels connected to the previous one. Yet not everyone succeeds. The archaeological record preserves the camps of survivors far more readily than those of communities that disappear. Behind every lineage that reaches a new homeland may lie countless others that never complete the journey. Disease injury, starvation, violent weather, dangerous river crossings, and simple misfortune constantly threaten even the most experienced travelers. The evidence remains incomplete, but what survives suggests that population numbers remain remarkably small throughout much of the late Pleistocene. Entire regions that today support millions of people may then contain only a few hundred scattered individuals. This reality transforms every human encounter. Meeting strangers is uncommon. Meeting strangers who speak unfamiliar languages or follow different traditions may become one of the most significant events of an entire generation. Sometimes such meetings likely lead to cooperation. Stone materials discovered far from their geological origins indicate that exchange networks continue stretching across impressive distances. Rare minerals, shells, pigments, and carefully crafted tools circulate between communities. These exchanges are unlikely to involve trade in the modern economic sense. Instead, they probably strengthen alliances, create marriage partnerships, and establish mutual obligations that increase everyone's chances of survival. Relationships become another survival technology. Genetic research increasingly supports this picture of interconnected populations. Rather than existing as completely isolated bands, many communities appear linked through occasional movement and intermarriage. These connections prevent dangerous levels of inbreeding, while allowing useful innovations to spread surprisingly far. A more efficient spear point developed in one region may eventually appear hundreds of kilometers away. Improved methods of processing animal hides or preserving food likely travel along similar social pathways. Ideas migrate alongside people. Sometimes they travel even farther. Nowhere is this gradual movement more remarkable than across the immense northern landscapes connecting Asia and North America. Today, the Bering Strait separates Siberia from Alaska with cold ocean waters. During much of the last ice age, however, sea levels remain dramatically lower. The exposed continental shelf forms Beringia, an enormous region of grasslands, rivers, wetlands, and rolling plains that in places extends more than 1,000 kilometers from north to south. It is not merely a narrow land bridge. It is an entire ecosystem. For thousands of years, animals move freely across this vast region. Mammoths, bison, horses, wolves, and many other species roam landscapes that modern maps conceal beneath the sea. Human communities gradually become part of this world as well. Scholars continue debating the exact timing and routes by which the ancestors of indigenous peoples in the Americas spread beyond Beringia. New archaeological discoveries frequently refine earlier models, and the evidence remains incomplete. Some populations may have lived within Beringia itself for extended periods before moving farther south. Others likely followed Pacific coastlines as glaciers retreated. Inland routes became increasingly accessible once massive ice sheets began separating. What appears increasingly clear is that this movement unfolds over many generations rather than during a single dramatic migration. Children born in one valley become grandparents in another. Their descendants inherit landscapes their ancestors never imagined. None of them realize they are entering continents where no human population has previously lived. Elsewhere, similar stories unfold across Eurasia. As forests expand northward, communities adapt by learning entirely new hunting strategies. Pursuing reindeer across open tundra requires different skills from stalking elk through dense woodland. Fishing becomes increasingly valuable in lakes formed by retreating glaciers. River systems turn into natural highways linking distant populations. Water, once an obstacle, increasingly becomes a pathway. Simple watercraft likely play a growing role in many regions, although direct archaeological evidence remains rare because wood rarely survives for thousands of years. Still, the rapid appearance of humans on islands separated by stretches of water strongly suggests impressive maritime abilities long before the rise of agriculture. These achievements remind us that prehistoric people are not passive observers of environmental change. They are active problem solvers. Every challenge encourages innovation. A changing coastline demands new fishing techniques. A dense forest inspires different hunting tools. Long winters encourage improved clothing and shelter construction. Communities constantly experiment, refining ideas through observation rather than formal science. Failure can be fatal. Success becomes tradition. Yet beneath these remarkable adaptations lies another reality that modern genetics has only recently begun to reveal. Not every human population living during this period leaves descendants. For much of the 20th century, researchers imagined human history as a straightforward expansion of a single successful species across empty landscapes. Ancient DNA has complicated that picture enormously. Genetic studies now indicate that many lineages disappear completely. Some populations leave only faint traces within later genomes. Others vanish without any detectable descendants at all. Entire branches of humanity flourish for thousands of years before quietly fading from the genetic record. This pattern reflects neither superiority nor failure. Small populations remain extraordinarily vulnerable to chance, a series of harsh winters, an epidemic, repeated poor hunting seasons, isolation from neighboring groups. Any combination of these factors may gradually reduce numbers until recovery becomes impossible. The story of human survival is therefore also a story of countless invisible losses. Every community that reaches the next valley carries memories of places left behind. Every migration leaves empty camps where fires will never again be lit. Every successful lineage exists because many others do not. The survivors walking out of the dying ice age inherit not only the future, but also the silent absence of those whose journeys ended before history had words to remember them. Some journeys end at the edge of an unfamiliar river, others continue for generations. To imagine these migrations as endless walking across empty landscapes is to misunderstand the pace of prehistoric life. Most movement happens in stages. A valley rich with game may support a community for decades before changing conditions encourage another gradual shift. Children grow into adults believing they belong to that place even if their grandparents remember another homeland beyond distant hills. Human history at this time is not one uninterrupted march across continents. It is a succession of temporary homes, each becoming part of a much longer journey. The landscapes themselves encourage this rhythm. Retreating glaciers expose broad corridors that had remained inaccessible for tens of thousands of years. Freshwater lakes appear in newly carved basins, attracting birds, fish, and grazing mammals. River systems stabilize long enough to support seasonal camps before shifting once again as meltwater continues reshaping the terrain. Every newly opened environment presents both opportunity and uncertainty. The people entering these regions rarely arrive as conquerors. They arrive as careful observers. The first priority is always understanding the land. Which plants can be eaten safely? Which valleys flood after heavy snowmelt? Where do predators den during winter? Which cliffs offer reliable shelter from prevailing winds? Knowledge accumulates slowly, often through costly experience. A poisonous plant mistaken for food, a frozen river that gives way unexpectedly, or a migration route that no longer supports game can have devastating consequences for an entire community. Yet every hardship becomes another lesson preserved in memory and passed to the next generation. This ability to transform experience into shared knowledge may be one of humanity's greatest evolutionary advantages. Unlike instinct alone, culture allows successful solutions to spread rapidly. A better spear-throwing technique can be demonstrated within days. A more efficient way to preserve meat through drying or smoking can become standard practice within a season. Improved methods of sewing layered clothing may protect hundreds of people long before biological evolution could produce any comparable adaptation. The human mind becomes the fastest changing tool in nature. Archaeological discoveries increasingly reveal just how sophisticated these communities truly are. Excavations across Eurasia uncover finely crafted spear points designed for specific prey. Microscopic wear patterns on stone blades show that many tools serve specialized purposes rather than general use. Some are used primarily for cutting meat. Others process hides. Still others shape wood or scrape bone. Such specialization reflects careful planning and a detailed understanding of available materials. Even the selection of stone demonstrates remarkable foresight. Certain types of flint fracture predictably producing exceptionally sharp edges. Obsidian forms blades almost molecularly thin. Quartzite, chert, and other rocks each possess distinct advantages depending on the intended task. In some regions, people transport high-quality stone across hundreds of kilometers, suggesting that reliable raw materials are valuable enough to justify extraordinary effort. These choices speak of minds constantly planning for the future. Preparation becomes a way of life. Long before leaving a seasonal camp, hunters likely repair weapons, prepare clothing, gather fuel, and preserve food. Women, men, and children all contribute according to age, experience, and circumstance, although the exact division of labour remains debated among scholars. The archaeological record rarely preserves enough detail to reconstruct every aspect of daily life with certainty. What survives in the evidence suggests flexibility rather than rigid uniformity. Different environments demand different solutions. Communities living beside productive rivers may rely heavily on fishing, while those occupying open grasslands continue following migratory herds. Coastal groups harvest shellfish, marine mammals, and seabirds. Mountain populations adapt to steep terrain, changing weather, and seasonal isolation. There is no single prehistoric way of life. There are countless ways of surviving. As these communities spread into unfamiliar territories, they also encounter landscapes unlike anything their ancestors have known. Dense forests gradually replace the immense mammoth steppe across much of Europe. Towering pines and birches interrupt once endless horizons. Visibility decreases dramatically. Hunting becomes quieter and more deliberate. Instead of pursuing enormous herds across open plains, hunters learn to track individual animals through tangled woodland. This ecological transition influences every aspect of existence. Weapons evolve. Movement changes. Even sound behaves differently beneath forest canopies. Open plains allow distant conversations and the thunder of migrating animals to carry for remarkable distances. Forests absorb noise, concealing both prey and predators, until they are much closer. Human perception adapts accordingly, becoming increasingly attentive to broken branches, subtle scents, and fleeting movements between trees. The world itself teaches new skills. Meanwhile, coastlines continue their relentless transformation. As global temperatures rise, melting ice sheets release staggering volumes of water into the oceans. Sea levels climb gradually but persistently over thousands of years. To any single generation, the advance seems modest, yet measured across centuries, entire landscapes vanish beneath the waves. Perhaps nowhere is this loss more dramatic than across the vast plains that once connect Britain to continental Europe. Today, the North Sea separates these lands. During much of the Late Ice Age, however, a broad region of rivers, wetlands, rolling hills, and grasslands stretches between them. Modern researchers call this lost landscape Doggerland. For thousands of years, it supports thriving ecosystems rich in wildlife and human activity. Families hunt there. Children grow up beside its rivers. Stories become attached to particular hills, lakes, and hunting grounds. Then slowly the sea begins reclaiming it. The process unfolds over many generations. Coastlines retreat. Marshes expand. Saltwater penetrates farther inland. Communities gradually abandon low-lying areas, moving toward higher ground, while still returning seasonally to places that remain above water. Eventually, even those disappear. Today, fishermen occasionally recover ancient animal bones, worked antlers, stone tools, and even traces of prehistoric forests from the seabed beneath the North Sea. These discoveries remind us that entire chapters of human history now lie submerged beneath modern oceans. Doggerland is not unique. Similar stories occur across the world. The exposed continental shelf of Southeast Asia, known as Sunderland, gradually fragments into the islands of Indonesia and Malaysia as rising seas flood enormous lowland plains. Coastlines around Australia shift dramatically. River valleys become estuaries. Islands form where broad landscapes once existed. Everywhere the ocean advances, human communities retreat. Not because they lose a battle, because the earth itself changes. What survives in the archaeological record captures only scattered moments from this immense transformation. Camps abandoned one century are buried beneath sediment the next. Wooden structures decay. Organic materials vanish. Entire settlements disappear beneath water that protects some remains while erasing countless others forever. The result is an incomplete picture. We know these people existed. We know they adapted repeatedly. We know they crossed extraordinary distances, but much of their world remains hidden beneath forests, deserts, river sediments, and oceans. The ancient survivors leave behind countless mysteries precisely because they succeed in moving forward. Instead of remaining where the land is dying, they follow opportunity into unfamiliar territories, carrying with them not monuments or written histories, but something far more enduring. The accumulated wisdom that allows humanity to begin again wherever the next horizon appears. Not every horizon leads into an empty world. For tens of thousands of years, modern humans are not the only members of the human family walking across Eurasia. Beyond the next mountain range or hidden within distant forests, live other people who share many familiar traits. They build tools, hunt dangerous animals, care for injured companions, and survive some of the harshest climates on Earth. They are neither mythical creatures nor primitive failures. They are close relatives whose histories become deeply intertwined with our own before slowly disappearing from the landscape. Among them, none are better known than the Neanderthals. For much of the 19th and early 20th centuries, Neanderthals are portrayed as clumsy, unintelligent cavemen destined to be replaced by a superior species. Popular illustrations exaggerate their posture and intelligence, creating an image that says more about modern prejudice than prehistoric reality. Archaeology has steadily dismantled that stereotype. Today, evidence paints a far richer picture. Neanderthals survive across Europe and Western Asia for hundreds of thousands of years before modern humans arrive in large numbers. During that immense span of time, they adapt repeatedly to advancing glaciers, changing ecosystems, and dangerous ice age environments. Their bodies reflect these conditions. They are generally shorter and more powerfully built than most modern humans, with broad chests, strong limbs, and features that likely help conserve heat during cold winters. Their physical appearance differs from ours. Their humanity does not. Excavated sites reveal sophisticated stone tool industries refined over countless generations. They control fire, construct shelters in some locations, and process animal hides using carefully designed implements. They hunt formidable prey, including bison horses, red deer, and occasionally mammoths. Cut marks on bones demonstrate skilled butchery. Wooden spears discovered at several sites indicate carefully planned hunting, rather than simple scavenging. Even more revealing are the signs of care. Several Neanderthal skeletons belong to individuals who survived severe injuries that would almost certainly have prevented independent living for months or even years. Broken limbs heal successfully. Missing teeth suggest companions prepare food suitable for someone unable to chew normally. Individuals with disabling conditions continue living long after their injuries occur. Compassion leaves few fossils, yet here it quietly appears. They also create objects whose purpose extends beyond survival alone. Pigments such as red and black minerals appear at some sites. Eagle talons modified into ornaments suggest symbolic behavior. Perforated shells, feathers, and carefully selected natural objects hint at forms of personal expression whose meanings remain beyond our reach. Scholars continue debating the extent and complexity of Neanderthal symbolic culture, but the older assumption that they lack imagination no longer fits the evidence. They think, they remember, they belong to social worlds every bit as meaningful as their own landscapes. Then, beginning around 45,000 years ago in many regions, increasing numbers of Homo sapiens expand into territories already occupied by Neanderthals. What follows is one of the most fascinating encounters in human history. For decades, researchers imagine a dramatic confrontation in which one species simply replaces another. Reality appears far more complicated. The archaeological record reveals periods when both populations occupy neighbouring regions. Sometimes they use similar resources while maintaining distinct technological traditions. In other cases, similarities between tools raise intriguing questions about whether ideas move between communities. Establishing direct cultural exchange remains difficult, but the possibility cannot be dismissed. More surprising still is the evidence hidden inside modern genomes. When ancient DNA technologies begin revolutionizing archaeology during the 21st century, researchers make an extraordinary discovery. Most people living outside sub-Saharan Africa today carry small percentages of Neanderthal DNA. This finding changes everything. It demonstrates that modern humans and Neanderthals do not remain completely separate. At various times and places they have children together whose descendants continue into the present. The human story is not one of absolute replacement. It is also one of connection. Exactly how often these encounters occur remains uncertain. Genetic evidence suggests they are relatively uncommon compared with the overall size of expanding Homo sapiens populations. Yet even infrequent interactions leave lasting biological traces because those descendants themselves have children over thousands of generations. Today, fragments of Neanderthal inheritance continue influencing aspects of the human immune system, skin biology, and other traits, although the effects vary greatly among individuals and populations. The ancient survivors unknowingly carry pieces of another humanity into the future. Neanderthals are not the only mystery. In 2008, archaeologists excavating Denisova Cave in Siberia recover an extraordinarily small fossil fragment of finger bone belonging to a young girl who lived tens of thousands of years ago. At first glance, the bone appears unremarkable. Its DNA tells a different story. Genetic analysis reveals an entirely distinct group of ancient humans previously unknown to science. Researchers name them Denisovans after the cave where the discovery is made. Unlike Neanderthals, whose skeletons are known from many sites, Denisovans remain astonishingly elusive. Only a handful of fossil remains have been confidently identified, yet genetically they leave an unexpectedly widespread legacy. Modern populations across parts of Asia-Oceania, and particularly among indigenous peoples of New Guinea and nearby regions, inherit notable amounts of Denisovan DNA. The implications are extraordinary. An entire branch of humanity survives primarily within our genomes rather than through abundant fossils. Scholars still debate the full geographic range of Denisovans because physical evidence remains scarce. Some researchers suspect they occupy enormous areas of Asia, adapting to environments ranging from tropical forests to the high Tibetan plateau. Genetic variants inherited from Denisovans even appear to help modern Tibetans thrive at high altitude by improving oxygen regulation. A vanished people continue helping others survive thousands of years after their disappearance. The human family tree grows increasingly complex with every new discovery. Ancient DNA has revealed additional populations whose exact relationships remain under investigation. Some lineages contribute genes to later humans before disappearing entirely. Others leave almost no recognizable descendants. The deeper scientists examine prehistoric genomes, the less straightforward human evolution becomes. It resembles not a simple branching tree, but an intricate network of populations separating, reconnecting, migrating, and occasionally merging again. No single explanation fully accounts for every pattern preserved within ancient DNA. Migration, isolation, changing climate, geography, and simple chance all shape these outcomes. Eventually, however, Neanderthals disappear from the archaeological record. The last known populations survive until roughly 40,000 years ago, though exact dates continue to be refined as new evidence emerges. Why they vanish remains one of prehistory's great questions. Climate instability likely places increasing stress upon already fragmented populations. Competition for resources may intensify in some regions. Small population size reduces genetic resilience. Interbreeding gradually absorbs some communities into expanding Homo sapiens populations. Rather than one dramatic cause, multiple pressures probably combine over many centuries. What survives in the record suggests no sudden apocalypse. Instead, another branch of humanity slowly fades. The ancient survivors continue walking forward, carrying with them not only their own traditions, but echoes of relatives who will never build kingdoms, never invent writing, and never leave monuments of stone. Their greatest monument is far quieter. It lives within the DNA of the people who survive long enough to inherit the world. Survival is rarely decided by a single dramatic moment. More often, it is shaped by thousands of ordinary decisions repeated every day for generations. A camp is built slightly above the floodplain rather than beside the river. Extra firewood is gathered before the first snowfall. Meat is dried instead of eaten immediately. A child is taught how to recognize dangerous clouds or poisonous roots long before that knowledge becomes essential. Individually, these choices seem almost insignificant. Together, they become the difference between a community that endures and one that quietly disappears from history. For the ancient survivors living through the closing centuries of the Ice Age, uncertainty becomes the only constant. No season can be taken for granted. One spring arrives early, bringing fresh grass that attracts grazing animals weeks ahead of expectation. Another remains bitterly cold, delaying migrations and leaving hunters searching over greater distances. Rivers swollen with glacial melt become impossible to cross where they had always been dependable. Lakes that once froze thick enough to support travel now remain dangerously thin. Every journey demands fresh judgment. Memory remains valuable, but memory alone is no longer enough. The environment changes too quickly. This constant unpredictability shapes the psychology of survival. Although archaeologists cannot directly recover emotions from ancient campsites, the material evidence suggests communities that prepare for uncertainty rather than expecting stability. Many seasonal settlements contain signs of careful planning. Stone tools are repaired rather than discarded. Valuable raw materials are transported across impressive distances. Animal bones reveal systematic butchering designed to preserve as much nutrition as possible. Nothing useful is casually wasted. Efficiency becomes a cultural habit. The same principle likely governs clothing. Ice Age garments almost certainly represent engineering achievements every bit as impressive in their own way as later bronze weapons or monumental architecture. Layered furs, carefully stitched seams, waterproof outer coverings, insulated footwear, and protective head coverings allow people to survive temperatures that would otherwise prove fatal. Very little of this survives in the archaeological record. Leather decays, fur disappears, plant fibers rot away. Yet hundreds of finely crafted bone needles recovered across Eurasia tell their own story. Many possess eyes so delicate that they would not look out of place among much later historical tools. Such precision suggests fitted clothing rather than simple draped hides. These garments do more than provide warmth. They expand the range of human possibility. A community equipped with effective cold weather clothing can explore valleys previously inaccessible during winter. Hunters can remain outdoors longer while tracking migrating herds. Children face lower risks from exposure. Every improvement in clothing increases the amount of usable landscape. Technology quietly enlarges the world. Shelter evolves alongside it. Open-air camps continue serving many seasonal purposes, but archaeological evidence also reveals increasing use of caves, rock overhangs, and naturally protected locations where conditions allow. Elsewhere, communities construct substantial temporary dwellings, using combinations of timber, animal hides, brush, and occasionally the bones of enormous Ice Age mammals. These structures are rarely random. Excavations often reveal carefully organized living spaces with designated hearths, working areas, sleeping places, refuse zones, and tool production sites. Even temporary camps display an internal order reflecting repeated experience. Home is portable, but home still matters. Fire remains at the center of nearly every occupied space. Its warmth is obvious. Its light extends productive hours beyond sunset. Its smoke discourages insects in warmer seasons and may help preserve meat suspended above the flames. Heated stones can warm shelters after the fire burns lower. Ash finds secondary uses in processing hides, and perhaps even in simple sanitation. Around these fires, another form of survival unfolds. Stories. No written language preserves them. No recording captures their voices. Yet nearly every traditional hunting society studied in more recent history places enormous importance upon oral knowledge. Practical instruction blends naturally with memory history, belief, humour, cautionary tales and observations about the natural world. There is every reason to believe Ice Age communities do the same. An elder may describe a distant valley where game reliably gathers after harsh winters. Another recalls which river crossing becomes deadly during spring thaw. Someone else remembers unusual weather from decades earlier that resembles conditions now beginning to appear again. Knowledge survives because people remember together. Children inherit more than genes. They inherit accumulated experience. This shared memory becomes especially important as environmental conditions continue shifting. Entire animal communities respond to changing climates. Some species gradually move northward, tracking cooler temperatures. Others retreat into isolated habitats where suitable conditions remain. New plants spread into regions they have never previously occupied. Different predators follow changing prey distributions. Humans must constantly update their understanding. A hunting strategy perfected over generations may suddenly lose effectiveness. Fresh solutions become necessary. Archaeological evidence increasingly reflects this flexibility. Microscopic analysis of ancient tools reveals wider ranges of activity than earlier periods often display. Implements once associated primarily with large game hunting are now accompanied by specialized equipment for fishing, plant processing, woodworking, and smaller animals. Rather than relying overwhelmingly upon mammoths or reindeer, many communities diversify. This broadening of subsistence reduces risk. If one food source fails, another may remain available. Modern ecologists sometimes describe resilient ecosystems as those possessing diversity rather than dependence. The same principle appears to apply to human societies. Diversity of skills, diversity of food, diversity of knowledge. Together they create resilience. Social relationships strengthen this resilience further. Although prehistoric populations remain relatively small, archaeological discoveries suggest surprisingly extensive interaction across large regions. Similar artistic styles appear hundreds of kilometers apart. Distinctive stone materials travel far beyond their natural sources. Marine shells reach inland settlements. Amber from northern coasts finds its way deep into continental Europe. Such patterns imply regular contact rather than complete isolation. Meetings between neighboring groups likely serve many purposes. Potential marriage partners reduce the dangers associated with small population sizes. Information about changing animal migration spreads rapidly. Rare raw materials are exchanged. Disputes may be negotiated before escalating into violence. Exactly how these relationships function remains uncertain, but the evidence increasingly favors cooperation as an essential component of long-term survival. Isolation can become deadly. Connection creates options. Even spiritual or symbolic traditions may contribute. Burials from the late Ice Age occasionally include carefully placed grave goods, red ochre decorative ornaments, and signs of deliberate ritual behavior. Scholars still debate the meanings behind these practices, and no single interpretation fully accounts for every discovery. Yet one conclusion appears increasingly difficult to avoid. These people think about identity. They think about memory. They think about those who have died. Such beliefs, whatever their precise form, may help communities endure repeated hardship by reinforcing shared purpose across generations. The world around them remains unstable. The world within them becomes a source of continuity. Ironically, many of the qualities that allow these ancient survivors to adapt during the final centuries of the Ice Age remain recognizable today. humanity continues to rely upon cooperation during disaster. Knowledge still passes from one generation to another. Communities remain strongest when they prepare before crisis arrives rather than after. Technology continues expanding the environments in which people can live. The tools have changed, the principle has not. Without realizing it, the people gathered around these ancient fires are developing patterns of resilience that will accompany their descendants into every future landscape, from fertile river valleys to remote islands, from mountain plateaus to great cities yet unimagined. Long before civilization, they are discovering one of humanity's oldest truths. No one survives a changing world alone. Even the most adaptable people cannot predict every disaster. For centuries, the changing climate has tested humanity with shifting seasons, disappearing coastlines, and unfamiliar landscapes. These transformations are immense, but they unfold slowly enough that communities can respond one generation at a time. Then there are moments when the Earth seems to move with terrifying speed, compressing years of change into hours or days. The archaeological record preserves only scattered clues to these sudden catastrophes. A layer of volcanic ash settles silently across an ancient campsite. An abandoned river terrace hints that floodwaters once reached unimaginable heights. Trees buried beneath thick sediment reveal that a peaceful valley became a torrent of mud and debris. No eyewitness account survives. The land itself becomes the witness. Among the greatest dangers are the glaciers that still dominate large portions of the northern hemisphere. Although they are steadily retreating, they remain unstable giants. As enormous walls of ice melt, vast lakes often form behind temporary natural dams made of ice rock and sediment. These barriers appear solid, yet many are surprisingly fragile. Eventually some fail. When they do, the results are almost beyond comprehension. Entire lakes can empty in a matter of days, unleashing floods carrying more water than many of today's largest rivers combined. The torrents tear through valleys, uprooting forests, transporting massive boulders, and reshaping landscapes across hundreds of kilometers. Modern geologists call these events glacial outburst floods. They have identified evidence for many such catastrophes in North America, Europe, and Asia. One of the most dramatic examples occurs near the immense glacial lakes that once occupied parts of present-day western North America. Repeated failures of ice dams release colossal floods that carve channels, strip away soil, and leave behind landscapes so unusual that early scientists struggle to explain them. To the ancient people living nearby, such an event would almost certainly seem like the destruction of the world itself. Yet even here perspective matters. Most communities never experience one of these floods directly. They may instead encounter the altered landscape years later. New river systems, changed valleys, unfamiliar lakes, or stories passed through generations warning never to camp in certain places. Disaster becomes memory. Memory becomes tradition. Not all catastrophes involve water. The earth beneath human feet remains restless. Volcanic eruptions continue throughout the closing millennia of the Ice Age, although few rival the immense eruption of Toba many tens of thousands of years earlier. By this period, most eruptions are regional, rather than global in their effects, yet they can still devastate nearby populations. Ash blankets vegetation. Rivers become choked with sediment. Animals abandon affected regions. Air filled with volcanic particles turns breathing into painful labor. Communities living close to active volcanoes may be forced to abandon familiar territories almost overnight. Unlike rising seas, volcanic eruptions allow little time for gradual adaptation. Still, archaeological evidence repeatedly suggests that human populations recover with remarkable resilience. Temporary abandonment rarely means permanent disappearance. People return when conditions improve. They rebuild. They begin again. Earthquakes add another layer of unpredictability. Although direct evidence linking prehistoric human settlements to specific earthquakes is often difficult to establish, tectonic activity continually reshapes parts of the ancient world. Cliffs collapse. Springs appear, or disappear. River channels shift after seismic disturbances. Coastal regions may rise or sink, altering shorelines in ways that future generations accept as natural. For communities whose understanding of the world depends upon stable landmarks, these changes carry profound significance. A familiar cave may no longer exist. A reliable freshwater source may suddenly dry up. The landscape itself ceases to be trustworthy. Meanwhile, the climate delivers its own surprises. One of the most remarkable examples occurs during a period now known as the Younger Dryas. Around 12,900 years ago, after thousands of years of overall warming large parts of the northern hemisphere, experience an abrupt return to much colder conditions. The reasons remain the subject of active scientific research. Many researchers favor explanations involving enormous releases of fresh water into the North Atlantic, disrupting ocean circulation patterns that normally transport heat northward. Others examine additional contributing factors. No single explanation fully accounts for every detail, but the climatic shift itself is well supported by evidence preserved in ice cores, lake sediments, pollen records, and other environmental archives. For people living through it, the effect is dramatic. Landscapes that have slowly grown warmer begin cooling again. Glaciers stabilize or advance in some regions. Vegetation changes. Animal populations adjust their movements once more. Communities that have already spent generations adapting to one set of environmental conditions suddenly face another reversal. Imagine teaching children that winters are becoming milder, only for your grandchildren to experience colder decades once again. Adaptation never truly ends. Some archaeological sites hint at changing settlement patterns during this period. Certain regions appear less densely occupied than before. Others show increased reliance upon different food sources as environmental conditions fluctuate. Scholars remain cautious. Human responses vary enormously from one region to another, and the archaeological record is often incomplete. Yet the broader pattern suggests populations responding creatively rather than uniformly collapsing. Flexibility remains humanity's greatest strength. Another challenge emerges from the disappearance of the Great Ice Age animals. By the end of the Pleistocene, mammoths have vanished from most mainland environments, surviving only in isolated pockets such as Wrangel Island for several thousand years longer. Giant deer, woolly rhinoceroses, and numerous other impressive species also disappear across much of their former range. For hunters whose ancestors have relied upon these animals for countless generations, this represents not merely a dietary adjustment, but a complete transformation of their relationship with the natural world. Large game hunting traditions become less central. Fishing expands, gathering becomes increasingly significant. Smaller animals provide a greater share of nutrition. Communities diversify because the world itself has diversified. This transition may not always be smooth. Periods of scarcity almost certainly occur. Some populations likely decline. Others merge with neighboring groups. Still others abandon familiar territories entirely in search of more favorable environments. Ancient DNA studies increasingly reveal these population movements, showing that human history during this period is far more dynamic than once believed. Communities appear. Communities disappear. Others blend together. The map of humanity is continually redrawn. Yet perhaps the most remarkable feature of this era is not the frequency of disasters. It is the refusal of people to surrender to them. Floods erase camps, but new camps appear. Forests replace grasslands and hunting strategies evolve. Cold returns and clothing improves. Animals disappear and diets broaden. Coastlines drown and communities move inland. Every challenge forces another adaptation. Every adaptation becomes part of humanity's growing inheritance. By the time the Younger Dryas finally comes to an end and warmer conditions return once more, the survivors are no longer the same people whose ancestors first watched the great glaciers begin to melt. The dying world has changed them, not through a single catastrophe, but through thousands of moments that demand resilience. Each disaster leaves behind fewer certainties and more experience. Each generation carries forward another lesson. Together, those lessons prepare humanity for a future that will require an entirely different kind of revolution, one not driven by survival alone, but by the possibility of finally remaining in one place. For countless generations, movement has been the safest answer to uncertainty. If a valley no longer provides enough game, people move to another. If rivers change their course, families follow the water. If forests replace grasslands, hunters learn new paths through unfamiliar trees. Mobility has protected humanity throughout the closing millennia of the Ice Age. It allows communities to stay one step ahead of environmental change. Yet as the world gradually settles into the warmer conditions of the early Holocene, another possibility begins to emerge. In certain places, people no longer need to keep moving quite so often. This change does not happen everywhere. It does not happen all at once. Most human communities continue living as highly skilled hunter-gatherers for thousands of years. Many remain mobile because mobility still offers the most reliable strategy for survival. But in a handful of unusually productive landscapes, the relationship between people and the land begins to shift. These places share one important characteristic. They provide dependable abundance. Large rivers fed by seasonal rainfall or mountain snowmelt produce fish in extraordinary numbers. Wetlands attract birds throughout the year. Wild grasses grow densely across fertile plains. Nut-bearing trees become increasingly common as forests mature. Herds of gazelles, deer, and wild cattle return predictably to the same locations. For perhaps the first time in human history, some communities realize that they can remain near one place for much longer than their ancestors ever imagined. The transformation is subtle. A seasonal camp begins lasting several months instead of several weeks. Shelters become stronger because there is less need to dismantle them quickly. Storage pits appear protecting food for future use. Stone grinding tools become increasingly common as people process seeds, nuts, and other plant foods collected in larger quantities. None of these changes represent agriculture. Not yet. They represent something equally important: confidence. Confidence that next season will resemble this one closely enough to justify preparing for it. Archaeological discoveries from the Near East illustrate this gradual transition with remarkable clarity. Long before cultivated wheat or domesticated sheep become widespread communities, associated with what archaeologists call the Natufian culture, establish relatively substantial settlements across parts of the Levant. These people remain hunter-gatherers. They still hunt gazelles and gather wild plants, yet many also construct durable stone-built dwellings, create cemeteries used across generations, and invest increasing effort in particular locations. Home begins acquiring permanence. This shift is not driven by comfort alone. Staying longer in one place creates entirely new possibilities. Food can be stored rather than consumed immediately. Tools become heavier because they no longer need to be carried constantly. Grinding stones weighing many kilograms suddenly become practical investments. Children grow up surrounded by familiar landmarks instead of continuously changing camps. Elders can preserve detailed knowledge about one landscape instead of many. Communities deepen their relationship with specific places. What survives in the archaeological record suggests increasingly sophisticated organization. Hearths are rebuilt repeatedly in the same locations. Stone walls define living spaces. Burials occur beneath or beside houses, creating enduring connections between the living and the dead. The evidence remains incomplete, and scholars continue debating exactly how these societies are organized, but one pattern appears unmistakable. People are beginning to imagine permanence. Ironically, this new stability grows directly out of thousands of years of instability. The ancient survivors have spent countless generations learning how to respond creatively to change. Now those same adaptive abilities allow them to recognize opportunity when environmental conditions become more predictable. Their greatest strength has never been movement itself. It has been flexibility. Elsewhere across the world, similar transitions unfold in different ways. In Japan, some communities associated with the early Jomon tradition develop remarkably stable settlements, while continuing to rely heavily upon hunting, fishing, and gathering rather than farming. Rich coastal environments support large populations long before agriculture dominates daily life. Along major rivers in many regions, fishing becomes increasingly productive. Seasonal camps gradually evolve into places visited year after year. Repeated occupation leaves thicker archaeological deposits, allowing researchers to reconstruct surprisingly detailed pictures of changing lifeways. One remarkable feature of these communities is their growing investment in objects designed to last. Stone bowls, mortars, grinding slabs, storage facilities, decorative ornaments. Such items make little sense for people expecting to relocate every few weeks. They reflect confidence that tomorrow's home will still be today's home. The landscape itself encourages this confidence. By the early Holocene, global temperatures become relatively stable compared with the dramatic fluctuations of the late Pleistocene. Forests mature across vast regions. Rivers establish more predictable channels. Coastlines approach their modern positions, although sea levels continue rising for several thousand years. For communities that have lived through endless environmental surprises, this increasing stability must seem extraordinary. Generations born during this period inherit a world that finally changes more slowly than the memories of their grandparents. The contrast is profound. Their ancestors watch glaciers retreat. They watch coastlines disappear. They watch entire ecosystems transform. Now many children grow up seeing familiar hills. Rivers and forests remain largely recognizable throughout their lives. Memory once again aligns with the land. This does not mean hardship disappears. Far from it. Droughts continue. Floods remain dangerous. Disease, injury, and food shortages persist. Yet the background rhythm of the planet becomes more dependable. Human societies begin planning farther into the future. Planning changes everything. If people expect to return repeatedly to the same location, planting seeds becomes worth considering. Protecting useful wild plants from competing vegetation suddenly offers advantages. Observing which grasses produce the largest seeds gains practical importance. Gradually, almost accidentally at first, people begin influencing the plants around them. The earliest stages of domestication are probably so subtle that no one recognizes them as revolutionary. A few seeds scattered near a camp, a patch of useful plants protected from grazing animals, selective harvesting that favors certain characteristics over others. Generation after generation, these small actions accumulate. Eventually, they reshape entire species. The same process begins affecting animals. Young goats or sheep captured rather than killed. Herds observed more carefully. Migration routes anticipated. The relationship between humans and wildlife slowly changes from pursuit toward management. Scholars still debate the exact sequence of these developments because different regions follow different paths. Agriculture does not arise from a single invention. It emerges gradually through countless experiments carried out by communities responding to local conditions. Some succeed, others fail completely. What survives in the archaeological record reflects only those experiments that ultimately endure. Behind every successful farming tradition likely stand many forgotten attempts. The ancient survivors continue relying primarily upon hunting and gathering for much of this period. Yet something fundamental has shifted. For thousands of years they have escaped a dying world by following opportunity wherever it appears. Now in certain remarkable places opportunity begins staying in one place. The earth that once forced constant movement finally offers the possibility of rootedness. The descendants of wandering hunters are taking their first careful steps toward villages, fields, and civilizations that their distant ancestors could never have imagined. They do not know it yet, but another transformation every bit as profound as the end of the Ice Age has already begun. The first permanent homes do not erase the memory of movement. Even as some communities begin returning to the same valleys year after year, The older rhythms of migration remain deeply woven into human experience. Stories still speak of distant mountains crossed by ancestors, rivers that once flowed through vanished plains and coastlines now hidden beneath the sea. The people building more durable settlements are only a few generations removed from those who survived by never staying in one place for long. The old world has not been forgotten. It has simply become more difficult to recognize. Across the warming landscapes of the early Holocene forests continue spreading into regions that had once been dominated by open grasslands. Oak, elm, hazel, pine, and birch gradually reshape much of Europe. Similar ecological transitions unfold across Asia and North America, though each follows its own regional pattern. To modern observers, forests often symbolize timeless stability. To the ancient survivors, expanding woodlands represent another profound environmental transformation. Open country allows hunters to observe migrating herds from great distances. Dense forests demand patience, stealth, and intimate familiarity with countless hidden paths. Visibility shrinks dramatically. Sounds become muted beneath thick canopies. Tracking individual animals replaces following immense migrations across the horizon. The world has become quieter. It has also become more complex. Rather than relying overwhelmingly on mammoths, giant bison, or wild horses, people increasingly exploit a wider variety of resources. Red deer browse through woodland clearings. Wild boar root beneath fallen leaves. Beavers reshape riverbanks. Fish thrive in newly stabilized lakes and streams. Waterfowl gather in expanding wetlands. Human diets become remarkably diverse. This diversity reduces dependence upon any single species, making communities more resilient to local ecological change. Archaeological evidence reflects this transition with surprising clarity. Animal bones recovered from early Holocene settlements often display a broader range of hunted species than many late Ice Age sites. Fish remains become increasingly common. Grinding stones reveal growing use of seeds, nuts, and wild cereals. Charred plant remains preserve traces of foods that earlier generations may have ignored or harvested only occasionally. The ancient survivors are not merely adapting to a new landscape. They are learning to see abundance in places their ancestors might have overlooked. This changing relationship with food influences nearly every aspect of daily life. Food storage becomes increasingly important. Instead of consuming everything immediately after a successful hunt, communities begin preserving greater quantities for future seasons. Drying, smoking, and underground storage pits extend the usefulness of valuable resources. Such practices reduce vulnerability during poor harvests or unsuccessful hunting periods. Planning stretches farther into the future. Time itself begins feeling different. Nomadic communities often think in terms of migration seasons and immediate environmental conditions. More settled communities gradually add another layer of planning measured in years rather than weeks. A house repaired this year may still shelter children many winters later. A fruit tree protected from damage may feed future generations. A burial place visited repeatedly becomes part of community identity. The landscape accumulates memory. One of the most striking archaeological developments during this period is the increasing appearance of cemeteries associated with particular settlements. Human beings have buried their dead for tens of thousands of years, but now some burial grounds remain in continuous use across many generations. The same places witness births, daily life, and remembrance. The living and the dead share the same landscape. This growing attachment to place carries emotional as well as practical consequences. Leaving a familiar camp has always been difficult. Leaving the graves of parents, grandparents, and children may be even harder. Communities begin investing not only labor but also identity into specific locations. The land itself becomes part of family history. Meanwhile, technological innovation continues quietly. Stone tool production grows increasingly specialized in many regions. Tiny stone blades known as microliths become widespread. These small, carefully shaped pieces can be fitted into wooden or bone shafts, creating composite tools that are lighter, more efficient and easier to repair than many earlier designs. A damaged spear no longer requires replacing an entire point. Only one small component needs changing. This may seem like a modest improvement. In reality, such innovations save valuable time, conserve scarce raw materials, and increase hunting efficiency. Small refinements accumulate into major advantages. Watercraft likely improve as well. Although organic materials rarely survive long enough to preserve complete boats from this era, indirect evidence strongly suggests increasingly sophisticated travel along rivers, lakes, and coastlines. Fishing equipment grows more elaborate. Communities occupy islands separated by significant stretches of water. Exchange networks continue carrying materials over impressive distances. Rivers become highways. Coastlines become corridors rather than barriers. Ideas travel alongside people. Decorative traditions spread between neighbouring populations. Similar styles of ornaments appear across broad geographic regions. Pigments continue playing symbolic roles whose precise meanings remain uncertain. Certain patterns of tool-making become recognizable over hundreds of kilometers, suggesting regular communication among communities that may never have viewed themselves as isolated. Humanity is becoming increasingly interconnected. This interconnectedness also supports resilience. When one region experiences temporary hardship, neighboring communities may already possess knowledge of alternative food sources or safer territories. Exchange relationships established during prosperous years become invaluable during difficult ones. Trust becomes another form of insurance. Modern anthropology repeatedly demonstrates that cooperation often provides greater long-term survival benefits than relentless competition among small populations. The archaeological evidence from the early Holocene generally supports this broader picture, though local conflicts undoubtedly occur as well. No prehistoric world is entirely peaceful. Resources remain valuable. Territory still matters. Yet widespread cultural similarities across large areas suggest that interaction is frequently constructive rather than exclusively hostile. Scholars continue debating exactly how these relationships function, because the evidence rarely preserves individual events. What survives instead are patterns. Patterns of shared technology. Patterns of exchange materials. Patterns of gradual cultural change. Together they reveal societies capable of remarkable adaptability without losing their broader social connections. At the same time, the Earth continues hiding enormous parts of its own history. Beneath modern coastlines lie forests drowned by rising seas. Ancient river valleys remain buried beneath thick layers of sediment. Former campsites disappear beneath expanding peat bogs. Glacial deposits conceal traces of thousands of forgotten journeys. Every archaeological discovery reminds researchers that countless others remain hidden. Some may never be found. Wood decays. Leather vanishes. Entire settlements erode away before anyone realizes they existed. History preserves fragments. The silence between those fragments remains immense. Yet enough evidence survives to reveal one extraordinary truth. The people who emerge from the dying ice age do not simply endure environmental catastrophe. They reshape themselves alongside the changing planet. Their technologies evolve. Their social networks expand. Their understanding of landscapes deepens. Their relationship with memory grows stronger. Without intending to, they lay the cultural foundations upon which later civilizations will eventually rise. The first cities, kingdoms, and written histories still lie thousands of years in the future. But their possibility already exists. It lives in communities that have learned not merely how to survive change, but how to transform change into opportunity. The most enduring inheritance of the ancient survivors is not a monument. It is a habit. For tens of thousands of years, human communities have responded to uncertainty with observation, cooperation, and adaptation. Those habits now begin producing something entirely new. In a handful of landscapes where rivers flood predictably, Wild plants grow in remarkable abundance, and animal herds return with dependable regularity. People gradually discover that they can shape the environment instead of merely responding to it. The transformation is so gradual that no one living through it realizes its significance. There is no single year in which humanity becomes agricultural. There is no inventor of farming. Instead, thousands of ordinary decisions accumulate across generations. A family notices that discarded seeds sprout near an old campsite. Someone clears competing vegetation around useful plants. Another chooses to gather the larger seed heads while leaving smaller ones behind. Herds of wild goats become familiar enough that their seasonal movements are anticipated with increasing precision. Children raised in these communities inherit landscapes already subtly altered by the choices of their parents. Nature and culture begin influencing one another in entirely new ways. Archaeologists often describe this period as one of domestication, but that word can unintentionally suggest a sudden act of control. The reality appears far more reciprocal. People adapt to plants just as plants adapt to people. Certain grasses benefit from growing near human settlements where competing vegetation is reduced. Humans in turn begin depending upon increasingly reliable harvests. Over many centuries, natural selection and human behavior combine to produce crops whose ancestors once looked very different. The same gradual partnership develops with animals. Wild sheep, goats, pigs, and eventually cattle become more than occasional prey. They become populations whose behavior is increasingly influenced by human choices. At first, the distinction is barely visible. Hunters may spare young females because they strengthen future herds. Communities may protect favored grazing areas. Captured animals may occasionally survive long enough to become familiar with human presence. Generation after generation, these small interactions slowly reshape both species. The evidence remains incomplete, and scholars continue debating the exact sequence of these developments in different regions. Agriculture arises independently in several parts of the world, including Southwest Asia, China, New Guinea, Mesoamerica, the Andes, and elsewhere, each following its own unique path. No single explanation fully accounts for humanity's transition toward farming. Climate plays an important role. Population growth contributes additional pressure. Local ecology shapes available opportunities. Cultural traditions influence which experiments continue and which are abandoned. The story is wonderfully diverse, yet beneath this diversity lies a common thread. The people pioneering these new ways of life are descendants of communities that have already survived one of the greatest environmental transformations in Earth's recent history. Their resilience did not begin with farming. Farming grew from resilience. Permanent architecture begins reflecting this new relationship with place. Earlier shelters are designed primarily for mobility. Now walls become thicker. Foundations become more substantial. Roofs are repaired rather than rebuilt from scratch. Storage rooms appear alongside living spaces. Communities invest increasing labor in buildings expected to outlast a single season. Every stone placed carefully into a wall represents confidence in tomorrow. Excavations at some of the earlier substantial settlements reveal houses built surprisingly close together. Paths develop between them. Shared spaces emerge. People are no longer simply living beside one another. They are beginning to form villages. With larger communities come entirely new challenges. Food must be distributed fairly. Resources require management. Conflicts demand resolution before they threaten long-term stability. The archaeological record cannot tell us precisely how these early societies organized themselves, but it suggests increasing social complexity without necessarily indicating rigid hierarchies. Leadership likely remains flexible. Experience probably carries enormous influence. Individuals skilled at understanding weather plants, animals, or construction become especially valuable. Knowledge remains the greatest form of wealth. This growing permanence also changes the rhythm of childhood. For much of human history, children accompany adults through constantly changing landscapes, learning migration routes, hunting techniques, edible plants and seasonal cycles across wide territories. Now, many children spend most of their early years in one community. They still learn practical survival skills, but they also inherit something relatively new. A hometown. Certain trees become familiar throughout an entire lifetime. Particular rivers define personal memory. The same hills watch generations grow old. Identity becomes increasingly tied to place rather than movement alone. Ironically, this deepening attachment develops only because earlier generations spend thousands of years mastering adaptation. Without their extraordinary flexibility, such stability would never have been possible. The changing relationship with time is equally profound. Hunter-gatherers certainly think about the future. Successful hunting requires planning. Seasonal movement depends upon anticipating environmental change. But settled communities begin planning across much longer horizons. Seeds planted today may not be harvested for many months. Fruit trees require years before producing reliable crops. Buildings demand maintenance over decades. Parents increasingly shape environments their children will inherit. The future becomes something people actively construct. This shift influences memory as well. The stories passed between generations no longer concern only distant journeys and vanished landscapes. They begin including the history of particular settlements. Who first built this house? Where did the ancestors clear the first fields? Which flood changed the river? Why are certain places considered sacred? History becomes rooted. Meanwhile, another remarkable development unfolds. Across different regions of the world, symbolic architecture begins appearing on a scale previously unknown. One of the most astonishing examples emerges in southeastern Anatolia, where massive stone pillars arranged in circular enclosures demonstrate extraordinary organizational ability long before the widespread adoption of agriculture. The precise social and religious significance of these monuments remains debated. What survives in the record suggests communities capable of coordinating enormous collective efforts, despite lacking later urban institutions. These builders are still astonishingly close in time to the ancient survivors of the Ice Age. Their achievements remind us that human imagination evolves alongside environmental adaptation. The capacity to cooperate at large scales has deep prehistoric roots. Scholars continue discussing exactly how these ceremonial sites relate to nearby settlements and emerging farming communities. No single explanation fully accounts for every aspect of their construction or use, yet they reveal societies thinking beyond immediate survival. People now invest tremendous effort into places carrying symbolic meaning across generations. The dying world has become memory. A different world is taking shape. Still echoes of the old life remain everywhere. Hunters continue ranging through forests. Fishing remains essential. Wild foods still provide enormous portions of many diets. Agriculture does not replace earlier traditions overnight. For thousands of years old and new ways of life exist side by side. Human history refuses to follow simple boundaries. It is a long conversation between continuity and change. The ancient survivors who once walked away from retreating glaciers could never imagine cities, kingdoms, or written law. Yet every village, every cultivated field, and every permanent home carry something inherited directly from them. Not merely their blood, not merely their tools, but the quiet conviction that no matter how completely the world changes, human beings can learn to change with it. Thousands of years pass. Forests mature where glaciers once stood. Rivers settle into courses that become familiar to later civilizations. Villages multiply, farming spreads across many regions, and the descendants of the ancient survivors gradually build societies that will one day leave behind cities, temples, and written records. Yet the older world never truly disappears. It simply sinks beneath the newer one. Modern travelers often cross landscapes without realizing that another landscape lies hidden below their feet. Beneath fertile farmland are forgotten hunting camps. Under river sediments rest ancient fireplaces where families once gathered after following migrating herds. Below busy coastlines stretch drowned forests, submerged valleys, and entire plains that vanished beneath rising seas thousands of years ago. The world we see today is layered. Every generation builds upon the remains of those before it. For archaeologists, uncovering these hidden worlds resembles assembling an enormous puzzle, with most of its pieces permanently missing. Unlike historians studying written civilizations, researchers investigating the end of the Ice Age rarely possess names, dates, or recorded events. They must reconstruct entire lifetimes from fragments so small that they would once have been overlooked. A broken stone blade, a handful of burned seeds, animal bones scattered beside an ancient hearth, microscopic grains of pollen trapped within lake sediments, tiny pieces of charcoal buried beneath meters of soil. Each clue contributes a single sentence to a story spanning thousands of years. One of the greatest revolutions in archaeology has come not from spectacular discoveries, but from increasingly sophisticated scientific techniques. Radiocarbon dating allows researchers to establish reliable chronologies for organic materials that survived thousands of years beneath the Earth. By measuring the gradual decay of radioactive carbon, scientists can estimate when ancient wood bone or charcoal last belonged to a living organism. This method transformed prehistoric research. Instead of relying solely on relative comparisons, archaeologists could begin placing ancient communities within a much more precise timeline. Although every measurement carries a margin of uncertainty, the overall picture becomes dramatically clearer. Another breakthrough comes from the study of ancient pollen. At first glance, grains of pollen seem almost insignificant. Viewed through a microscope, however, they become extraordinary historical documents. Different plant species produce distinctive pollen shapes. Year after year, lakes and wetlands quietly collect these microscopic particles within accumulating sediments. Thousands of years later, scientists extract long cores from lake bottoms and examine each layer in sequence. The changing proportions of pollen reveal shifting landscapes. An increase in tree pollen suggests expanding forests. Declining grass pollen reflects the disappearance of open steppe. The appearance of cultivated cereal pollen signals the spread of agriculture. Without a single written word, entire environmental histories emerge. Ice cores provide another remarkable archive. Deep within Greenland and Antarctica, annual snowfall compresses into layered ice, preserving tiny bubbles of ancient atmosphere. These frozen records allow scientists to reconstruct past temperatures, volcanic eruptions, atmospheric composition, and abrupt climatic shifts reaching back hundreds of thousands of years. The Younger Dryas, the gradual warming after the last glacial maximum, changes in greenhouse gas concentrations, all leave measurable traces inside the ice. The dying world keeps remarkably careful records. It simply records them in frozen water instead of ink. Geology contributes its own testimony. Ancient shorelines stranded far above modern sea level reveal changing coastlines. River terraces preserve evidence of catastrophic floods. Cave formations grow slowly enough to record variations in rainfall through subtle changes in their chemistry. Sand dunes indicate shifting wind patterns across prehistoric deserts. Every landscape becomes an archive for those who know how to read it. Still, perhaps the most astonishing discoveries come from beneath the sea. When 19th century fishermen occasionally pull unusual animal bones from the floor of the North Sea, few imagine they're recovering traces of an entire lost landscape. Today, advances in marine archaeology and underwater surveying have transformed understanding of these submerged worlds. Sophisticated sonar systems map drowned river valleys still winding beneath modern waters. Seismic imaging reveals buried hills and ancient lake basins. Divers recover worked flints antlers shaped into tools, fragments of wooden structures and preserved peat containing pollen from forests that vanished thousands of years ago. Doggerland gradually emerges from obscurity, not as a mythical Atlantis, as a real homeland. It once stretches across tens of thousands of square kilometres between Britain and mainland Europe. Rivers flow through broad plains rich in wildlife. Human communities hunt fish, gather plants, and raise children across landscapes now hidden beneath waves. Rising seas slowly erase it, yet they also protect parts of it beneath layers of marine sediment. The evidence remains incomplete because excavating underwater landscapes presents extraordinary technical challenges. Vast areas remain unexplored, and many discoveries occur accidentally during offshore construction or commercial fishing. Every recovered artifact hints at countless others still waiting beneath the seabed. Similar investigations unfold elsewhere around the globe. Off the coasts of Australia, researchers identify ancient shorelines submerged by post-glacial sea level rise. Around Southeast Asia, drowned river systems reveal the former extent of Sunderland. Near North America, submerged forests preserve trees that once stood far from the ocean. These discoveries remind us that much of humanity's earlier story now lies underwater. Our modern maps conceal enormous chapters of prehistoric geography. Technology continues opening new windows into this forgotten past. Ground-penetrating radar allows archaeologists to identify buried features without excavation. Satellite imagery reveals ancient pathways, settlements, and landscape modifications invisible from ground level. LiDAR using laser pulses fired from aircraft strips weigh dense forest canopies, digitally exposing archaeological sites long hidden beneath vegetation. Entire prehistoric landscapes emerge where researchers once believed nothing remained. The ancient survivors are becoming visible again, yet every answer produces new questions. Why do some settlements flourish while neighbouring ones disappear? How much interaction exists between distant populations? Exactly how quickly do different regions respond to climatic shifts? What traditions vanish forever because they leave no material traces? Scholars continue debating many details because the evidence remains fragmentary. That uncertainty is not a weakness. It is an honest reflection of the extraordinary age of these events. The silence of prehistory can never be filled completely, but it can be understood more clearly than ever before. Piece by piece, layer by layer, hidden beneath forests, rivers, deserts, and oceans, the ancient world that once seemed lost is quietly returning. Not through legend or speculation, but through the patient work of science, uncovering the footsteps of those who walked out of a dying world and unknowingly built the foundation of our own. The deeper archaeologists dig into humanity's distant past, the more often they encounter stories that seem almost too familiar. Nearly every culture preserves memories of a great flood. Many tell of ancestral lands that disappeared beneath the sea. Others describe a time when the world grew colder, darker, or strangely different before people found safety elsewhere. For centuries, such traditions were often treated either as literal history or as pure imagination. Today, researchers approach them more carefully. Neither complete acceptance nor outright dismissal adequately explains why remarkably similar themes appear across societies separated by oceans and thousands of years. The ancient survivors leave more than bones and stone tools. They also leave memory. The challenge lies in understanding how memory changes across immense spans of time. All traditions can preserve surprisingly accurate information for many generations. Studies of indigenous cultures around the world have shown that stories sometimes retain genuine environmental observations for centuries, and in certain cases perhaps even longer. Narratives describing volcanic eruptions, unusual coastlines, earthquakes, or changing rivers occasionally correspond with geological evidence in remarkable ways. Yet oral tradition is never a simple recording. Every retelling reshapes the story. Practical lessons become symbolic. Specific places become sacred landscapes. Individual events merge with others until history and meaning become inseparable. This process makes interpretation extraordinarily difficult. A flood story may preserve the distant memory of a real river overflowing its banks. It may reflect repeated seasonal flooding experienced across countless generations. It may symbolize renewal rather than describing any particular event. or several of these possibilities may exist simultaneously. No single explanation fully accounts for every tradition. One of the most enduring examples concerns the widespread appearance of flood narratives. From the ancient civilizations of Mesopotamia to stories preserved by indigenous peoples across Australia, the Americas, Asia, and the Pacific water often appears as a force capable of transforming the world. It is tempting to imagine that every tradition refers to one enormous prehistoric flood. The evidence does not support such a simple conclusion. Instead, geology reveals many different flood events occurring across different places and times. Glacial outburst floods reshape enormous regions. Rising sea levels gradually drown coastlines over thousands of years. Tsunamis generated by earthquakes or underwater landslides devastate local communities. Large river systems periodically overflow after exceptional rainfall. Different societies experience different disasters, yet all recognize the extraordinary power of water. The memory survives because the experience is repeated. Doggerland provides a fascinating example. As sea levels rise after the last ice age, the broad plains connecting Britain with continental Europe disappear, gradually beneath the advancing North Sea. Communities living there almost certainly witness coastlines retreating within the memory of successive generations. Then, around 8,200 years ago, another dramatic event may accelerate local destruction. Off the coast of present-day Norway, an enormous submarine landslide known as the Storegga Slide triggers a massive tsunami that races across parts of the North Atlantic. Evidence suggests waves strike sections of the already diminishing Doggerland. Exactly how many people are affected remains uncertain. Some areas may already have been abandoned because of earlier sea level rise. Others may still support scattered communities. Scholars continue debating the scale of the tsunami's human impact because archaeological evidence beneath the sea remains limited. What is clear is that another chapter closes. The lost plain becomes increasingly inaccessible forever. It requires little imagination to understand how such experiences might survive in collective memory. A grandparent remembers hunting beside a river now claimed by the sea. Their grandchildren know only shallow coastal waters. Later generations inherit stories of a land beneath the waves. Myth and history slowly intertwine. Something similar may occur in many other parts of the world. Across Southeast Asia, the flooding of Sunderland transforms one immense connected landscape into thousands of islands. Communities that once travel largely over land now become separated by expanding seas. Languages gradually diverge. Cultures develop independently. Ancient relationships fade as geography itself changes. The earth redraws the map. Memory struggles to keep pace. Some traditions preserve references to former coastlines now lying underwater. Others describe journeys from lands no longer visible. Researchers remain cautious. The evidence rarely allows direct connections between specific myths and particular prehistoric events. Still, the possibility that fragments of genuine environmental memory survive within later traditions has become an increasingly active area of scholarly interest. The key lies in careful distinction. Scientific evidence establishes what happened physically. Cultural traditions reveal how human communities remembered and interpreted profound change. These are not competing forms of knowledge. They answer different questions. Geology explains how coastlines disappeared. Stories explain what those disappearances meant to the people who experienced them. Confusion arises when one is expected to replace the other. This distinction becomes especially important when considering popular claims about lost civilizations. The fascination with Atlantis illustrates the challenge perfectly. Since antiquity, countless writers have attempted to identify a real location for Plato's famous island. Suggestions have ranged from the Mediterranean to the Atlantic Ocean and far beyond. Modern archaeological evidence, however, provides no support for the existence of an advanced global civilization matching later popular interpretations of Atlantis. This absence of evidence does not diminish the reality of prehistoric losses. Entire landscapes genuinely disappear beneath rising seas. Communities truly abandon ancestral homelands. Cultures vanish from the archaeological record. The actual history is already extraordinary. It requires no mythical super-civilization. Likewise, claims that every flood legend refers to a single worldwide catastrophe are not supported by mainstream geology. The evidence instead points toward many regional events unfolding across different times and places. Their cumulative impact upon human memory may explain why flood narratives become so widespread. Reality proves both more complicated and more interesting than simple universal explanations. The ancient survivors leave behind something even more valuable than legends. They leave perspective. Their world changes repeatedly. Glaciers retreat. Forests expand. Coastlines vanish. Great animals disappear. New landscapes emerge. Again and again, communities respond not by perfectly preserving the past, but by carrying forward what matters most: knowledge, relationships, memory, adaptation. Today, science and tradition together allow us to glimpse that inheritance. Neither provides a complete picture alone, but together they remind us that long before written history, humanity is already learning one of its oldest lessons. The world never remains the same. The challenge has always been remembering enough of yesterday to survive tomorrow. The story of the ancient survivors no longer lives only in buried campsites or forgotten coastlines. It also lives inside every human being. For most of history, archaeologists reconstruct the past primarily through stone, bone, charcoal, and landscapes. Those materials remain indispensable, but over the past few decades, another archive has transformed our understanding of prehistory. The archive is biological. Hidden within every cell of the human body lies a record written across hundreds of thousands of years. DNA does not preserve names or personal memories, yet it carries traces of migrations, encounters, separations, and survival that no artifact alone could reveal. Ancient DNA has revolutionized the study of humanity's deep past. The process is remarkably delicate. Scientists recover tiny fragments of genetic material from ancient bones or teeth that have survived for thousands of years under favorable conditions. Because contamination from modern DNA is such a constant risk, laboratories operate under exceptionally strict procedures. Researchers wear protective clothing, work in cleanroom environments, and repeat analyses independently to verify results. Even then, success is never guaranteed. DNA degrades over time. Heat, moisture, and changing soil chemistry destroy it rapidly in many environments. Entire regions of the world preserve very little ancient genetic material simply because the climate is too warm or humid. The evidence remains incomplete. Yet the discoveries made so far have fundamentally changed the story of human origins. Earlier generations often imagined prehistoric populations as relatively isolated and stable. Ancient DNA tells a different story. Human communities are constantly moving. Groups divide. Others merge. Some expand dramatically. Others disappear almost entirely. The history of our species resembles a network of intersecting paths far more than a series of neatly separated branches. One of the clearest examples comes from Europe. Genetic studies reveal that the continent has experienced multiple major population shifts over thousands of years. Hunter-gatherers who survived the end of the Ice Age are later joined by farming communities expanding from Southwest Asia. Still later, pastoral populations associated with the Eurasian steppe contribute another significant wave of ancestry. None of these movements completely replace what came before. Instead, they combine. Modern populations inherit varying proportions from several ancient groups rather than descending from only one. The ancient survivors remain present even after countless later migrations. A similar complexity appears across Asia. Ancient populations repeatedly separate and reconnect as climates shift, mountain passes, open coastlines change, and technologies spread. Genetic evidence increasingly reveals that populations previously thought unrelated often exchange both ideas and ancestry over long periods. Human history rarely follows straight lines. The Americas provide another remarkable example. For many years, researchers debated exactly how and when the first people entered these continents. Ancient DNA combined with archaeology and geology now paints an increasingly detailed picture. The ancestors of indigenous peoples in the Americas derive from populations connected to northeastern Asia, but their history is far from simple. Evidence suggests periods of isolation, multiple waves of expansion, and rapid movement throughout the continents after routes become accessible. Within only a few thousand years, human communities occupy environments ranging from Arctic tundra to tropical rainforest and high Andean mountains. Such adaptability reflects the legacy of countless earlier generations who have already learned how to survive extraordinary environmental diversity. The same genetic evidence also reminds us of those who disappear. Many prehistoric populations leave few or no direct descendants. Some survive only as faint traces within later genomes. Others vanish entirely. Their cultural traditions may persist through neighboring communities. Their genes may not. This realization has reshaped how scientists think about extinction. Human disappearance is often gradual rather than dramatic. A small community may slowly merge with larger neighboring populations over generations. Distinct languages fade. Unique customs become blended with others. Eventually, only archaeology or genetics reveals that such a people ever existed. The ancient survivors inherit not only landscapes but also fragments of countless vanished communities. This process continues throughout history. No civilization develops in complete isolation. Every society carries influences from those that came before. Sometimes those influences are obvious. Sometimes they remain hidden until scientific techniques reveal them thousands of years later. Even certain physical adaptations tell stories of ancient survival. Populations whose ancestors spend long periods at high altitudes develop genetic variations that improve oxygen use. Communities living in regions with particular diseases evolve different forms of resistance. Skin pigmentation reflects complex interactions among sunlight migration and ancestry rather than any simple pattern. Lactose tolerance develops independently in multiple farming and pastoral societies after the domestication of dairy animals. Each adaptation represents another conversation between humanity and the changing environment. None appear overnight. All require generations. The remarkable thing is not that humans evolve. It is how often culture changes much faster than biology. A new tool spreads within decades. A farming technique expands across regions within centuries. A language changes continuously. Genes by comparison usually respond more slowly. Throughout the end of the Ice Age and the beginning of the Holocene, cultural flexibility repeatedly allows communities to solve problems long before natural selection alone could produce biological solutions. This combination of biological inheritance and cultural innovation becomes humanity's defining characteristic. We inherit bodies shaped by ancient environments. We inherit knowledge shaped by ancient experience. Together they allow our species to occupy deserts, rainforests, mountains, islands, frozen tundra, and eventually even space. The first step toward all of that begins with people who simply refuse to stop adapting. Perhaps the greatest lesson emerging from modern genetics is humility. For centuries, many societies imagine themselves as distinct and separate from everyone else. Ancient DNA reveals a much more interconnected reality. Human populations have always mixed. Ideas have always traveled. Migration has always shaped civilizations. The boundaries we often imagine as permanent are in historical terms remarkably fluid. The ancient survivors belong to no single modern nation. They belong to everyone. Every family alive today descends from countless prehistoric communities, spread across different landscapes and different moments in time. Some ancestors hunt reindeer across frozen plains. Others gather shellfish along disappearing coastlines. Some follow rivers into newly opened valleys. Others remain in forests where glaciers never reach. Together their stories converge. Not into one perfect lineage, but into humanity itself. The dying world they once escaped has vanished almost completely. Its glaciers have retreated, its mammoths have disappeared, its submerged plains lie hidden beneath modern seas. Yet its greatest achievement continues walking the earth, not because those ancient people defeat nature, but because they learn generation after generation how to become part of its endless transformation. The final traces of the dying world are almost impossible to see. A traveller standing on a modern coastline watches waves breaking against familiar shores, unaware that beneath the water lie ancient forests where hunters once followed deer between towering trees. A farmer-turned soil that covers a campsite abandoned 12,000 years ago. A city rises above river sediments that preserve forgotten footprints pressed into soft mud during the last centuries of the Ice Age. The ancient survivors have disappeared. Their world has disappeared, yet neither is truly gone. Every scientific discovery made during the past century has revealed the same remarkable pattern. Humanity does not inherit the Earth because it is the strongest species. It inherits the Earth because it is the most adaptable. Again and again, the archaeological record returns to this simple truth. When glaciers advance, people adjust. When glaciers retreat, they adjust again. When forests replace grasslands, they learn new ways of hunting. When coastlines vanish beneath rising seas, they move inland. When familiar animals disappear, they broaden their diets. When climates become unpredictable, they strengthen cooperation. Survival is never guaranteed, but possibility remains. This resilience is easy to overlook precisely because it becomes so successful. Modern civilization often creates the illusion that stability is normal. Roads remain in place for decades. Cities endure for centuries. Maps appear fixed. National borders seem permanent. The ancient survivors would recognize none of those assumptions. To them, permanence is an exception rather than a rule. Land itself can disappear. Rivers can change course. Entire ecosystems can vanish within the memory of several generations. Home is not defined only by geography. It is defined by the people who carry knowledge together. That lesson echoes through every chapter of later human history. Long after the Ice Age ends, civilizations continue rising and falling. Empires expand before collapsing. Trade routes shift. Languages appear and disappear. Forests are cleared. Deserts spread. Coastlines continue changing. History does not become stable simply because agriculture begins. It merely changes scale. The same adaptive qualities that once helped small hunter-gatherer communities survive eventually support kingdom cities and global societies. Innovation replaces tradition when necessary. Cooperation expands beyond families into villages, nations, and eventually international networks. Knowledge accumulates rather than beginning anew with every generation. The inheritance of the ancient survivors continues growing. Modern science itself reflects this inheritance. Archaeologists compare discoveries from different continents. Climate scientists reconstruct environments from ice cores and ocean sediments. Geneticists recover fragments of DNA from ancient bones. Geologists trace vanished rivers hidden beneath deserts. Marine archaeologists map drowned landscapes lying beneath the sea. Each discipline contributes another fragment of the same immense story. No single field explains everything. Together they reveal a humanity deeply connected to an ever-changing planet. The evidence also reminds us how much remains unknown. Vast portions of prehistoric coastlines remain unexplored beneath modern oceans. Dense forests conceal countless archaeological sites. Changing rivers continue eroding ancient settlements before they can be documented. Entire cultures may have vanished, leaving almost no recognizable trace. The silence of deep history will never disappear completely. There will always be mysteries, yet uncertainty is not failure. It is an invitation to continue looking. Every generation asks new questions. Every generation develops better tools. Each discovery changes the picture just enough to reveal how much larger it truly is. Perhaps that is the greatest irony of all. The people who leave behind no writing become known through the most advanced scientific methods ever developed. The descendants they could never imagine spend decades sequencing their DNA, analyzing microscopic pollen grains, mapping submerged valleys with satellites and sonar, and reconstructing climates from bubbles trapped inside ancient ice. Across 12,000 years, knowledge completes a circle. The survivors once read the land to remain alive. Today, humanity reads the same land to remember them. Their greatest legacy is not a monument rising above the horizon. It is an example. They demonstrate that adaptation does not require certainty. It requires observation, patience, cooperation, the willingness to abandon familiar answers when the world itself changes. Those lessons remain surprisingly modern. Climate continues shifting. Coastlines continue evolving. Species continue appearing and disappearing. Human societies still face environmental challenges that demand flexibility rather than denial. The scale is different. The principle is not. Looking backward across the immense span separating us from those ancient people, one truth becomes increasingly difficult to ignore. Our ancestors do not survive because they predict the future perfectly. They survive because they accept that the future cannot be predicted perfectly. Instead of resisting every change, they learn from it. Instead of clinging to landscapes that no longer sustain them, they search for new possibilities. Instead of preserving every tradition unchanged, they carry forward only what remains useful while allowing other customs to evolve. This balance between memory and adaptation becomes humanity's defining strength. Without it, there would be no villages, no agriculture, no cities, no science, no history. Every achievement rests upon foundations laid by communities whose names will never be known. The ancient survivors walk out of a dying world without realizing they are also walking toward ours. They leave no kings, no written laws, no towering monuments proclaiming their greatness. What they leave is something quieter, yet ultimately more enduring. A species capable of remembering, learning, cooperating, and beginning again. That inheritance still belongs to us. Every step taken across modern landscapes echoes journeys begun long before history found words to describe them. The glaciers are gone. The mammoths are gone. The drowned plains sleep beneath silent seas. But the people who crossed them never truly vanished. They continue generation after generation in every human life that follows. Their world ends. Humanity does not. Word count 1076. Final wind down. The last fires of the Ice Age burn low without anyone recognizing that an age is ending. A family settles beside a river one evening, much as countless families have done before them. Children fall asleep beneath familiar stars. Elders quietly remember places that younger generations have never seen. Somewhere beyond the horizon, another glacier melts into a river that will eventually reach the sea. Somewhere else, waves advance a little farther across a forgotten shoreline. No single moment marks the end of their world. Instead, the old earth slips gently into memory. That quiet ending may be the most extraordinary part of the story. History often celebrates dramatic victories and sudden collapses, yet the greatest transformation experienced by our species unfolds through patience rather than spectacle. Thousands of ordinary mornings, careful observations, successful hunts, difficult winters, shared meals, and remembered paths gradually carry humanity across one of the greatest environmental changes our planet has ever known. The people who accomplish this never know they are changing history. They simply wake each day and do what survival asks of them. They watch the weather. They follow the animals. They teach their children. They care for one another. They begin again after every hardship. Across thousands of years, those simple acts become the foundation of everything that follows. The city's civilizations and cultures of later ages often seem far removed from these ancient travelers. Yet beneath every modern road lies an older path. Beneath every field rests a landscape shaped by countless generations before farming ever began. Beneath every story of human achievement is the quieter story of people who refused to surrender when the world around them changed. The landscapes they knew are mostly gone. The coastlines have shifted. The glaciers have retreated. The great herds have faded into fossils and memory. Yet their greatest achievement was never the world they left behind. It was the future they unknowingly made possible. And so the ancient survivors slowly disappear into the immense current of time, leaving only scattered traces for archaeology, genetics, and geology to uncover. The wind still crosses the valleys they once walked. Rivers continue flowing towards seas that cover forgotten homelands. Above those silent landscapes, humanity continues its journey, carrying forward the same enduring gift that allowed those distant ancestors to walk out of a dying world and into the beginning of our own.